This Nissan Z is quite simply one of the best performance cars on sale in America today. Not because it's perfect, it definitely has its flaws, but we'll talk about those in a bit, but because it's the right blend of attainability, just over $40,000 starting. I wouldn't quite call it affordable, but I would call it attainable and a reach goal, perhaps, for some. Also, it has a lot more personality than most of the entries in this segment, while being a more performance-oriented vehicle than some of the others. Since the Z is all about the way that it drives, let's talk about that before we get to the rest of the details. Numbers first. This particular model went 0 to 60 in 4.8 seconds, and that's because I am driving the model with the 6-speed manual. This is certainly the most fun way to get your Z. It's probably the way I would buy the Z, but if you want the fastest 0 to 60 time, then you want the 9-speed automatic transmission. It's essentially the same price as the 6-speed manual. It's not going to be as engaging, but it is going to get you faster 0 to 60, down to as quick as 4.2 seconds with launch control. Most folks will be getting between 4.2 and 4.4 because, of course, this is a rear-wheel drive vehicle, so the surface that you're on is going to be incredibly important. If you're on a perfect drag strip style surface, 4.2 seconds. If you're out on a regular road surface like this, 4.4 is probably a more rational expectation. The model I'm driving today has the optional performance package. This is round about a $10,000 option, but it does bundle things that are important if you want to get the most out of your Z. A limited slip differential in the back, upgraded brakes, a different suspension tune, and a bunch of other changes here and there, but those are the core ones. That's probably why this has a really short stopping distance. I measured 109 feet, 60 miles an hour to 0 on a regular old road surface. If you're on a track, it's probably going to stop a little bit shorter. Perhaps more important than the stopping distance is the brake pedal feel and the fade resistance, both of which are improved with the performance package. At the launch event, I was able to drive the two options back to back, and I definitely preferred the way that the brakes feel on the model with the performance package. Fade resistance is also going to be better if you do plan on doing any sort of auto-crossing or weekend tracking of your Nissan Z. Now, when it comes to handling, I like the way this feels a bit more than the Toyota Supra, and I know this might be a little bit controversial. In some situations, I would agree with some folks out there that have said that the Supra handles better, quote unquote, than the Z, but I like the way this feels. It has a really good on-center feel. The steering is very direct. The weight of the steering rack is a little bit heavy for my personal preference, but I think that this comes across as more engaging and having more personality than the Supra does. The Supra can sometimes have more of a video gamey feel, and the same thing goes for the BMW Z4, which is essentially the same thing as the Supra with its top lopped off. When thinking about performance, remember that the Z is not exactly a lightweight. This is certainly heavier than something like a Mazda MX-5 because the mission is very different. This is very targeted at the Toyota Supra, obviously the BMW Z4, perhaps a number of less expensive Porsches that are available, and I guess in a stretch, something like the Mustang or the Camaro. But the Mustang and Camaro definitely drive bigger than this, which is why when it comes to handling, I'm going to give this an A+. Some of this has to do with the personality and the feel of the vehicle, but obviously the capability numbers are also excellent, especially if you get the performance package. But I'll talk more about the value proposition there in a little bit. As far as the ride quality goes, I have to give that an A as well. I think Nissan struck the right balance between giving this a daily driver livable ride and having solid performance. Those two things are a little bit at odds with one another, especially in a vehicle with the kind of curb weight we find in this Nissan Z. Now, don't get me wrong, the Z is definitely still firm. Out on a road like this, you will still feel all of the small imperfections. You will feel every inch of that pothole as you descend into it, and then the suspension gets upset as you come back out of it. But it does a really good job of calming things down and for a performance vehicle, feeling daily driver livable. This is definitely a bit softer than the sportiest performance modes that you'll find, for instance, in something like a BMW M3. Comparatively, the Mustang and the Camaro definitely drive bigger than this, and driving something like the Dodge Challenger around, sort of like driving an apartment building in comparison to the Z. There is something very unique about a small two-seat vehicle like this as far as the way that it feels out on the road. And if you haven't driven one, then you should probably get behind the wheel of one. If you have one, then you know what I mean. It feels like the world is spinning around you because I'm a lot closer to the rear axle than the front axle in this vehicle, and that definitely imparts a very different feel out on the twisties like this. Now, on the downside for the format of this vehicle, because that cargo area is open to the passenger area, you do get a reasonable amount of road noise in the cabin. And out on this particular road surface, you will definitely notice that. In my cabin noise test at 50 miles an hour, I measured 73.5 decibels in here, and that was in 6th gear, with the engine sort of loafing around 1800 RPM or so. That is definitely louder than the Mustang or the Camaro, but I suppose it's all part of the experience in the Z. On the other hand, I'm still going to have to give it a C when it comes to cabin noise, because you're probably going to be cross-shopping some of those more practical options with an actual back seat. Over the last week, I've been averaging about 18 miles per gallon. Keep in mind, I am in the 6-speed manual equipped model. If you get the 9-speed automatic, you could get up to 22 miles per gallon combined. I suspect most folks will be buying the 9-speed, of course, but most of those people probably should learn how to drive a manual because this is a pretty decent 6-speed. It comes across as a little bit less video game-like than some of the manual transmissions that you might want to be cross-shopping with this, and perhaps a little bit less truck-like than some years in the Ford Mustang, especially the Mustang GT. The clutch pedal does have a decent travel. It's not the shortest travel clutch that I've ever driven, but the transmission has a nice notchy engagement to it. It's really easy to tell what gear you're in. It's also pretty easy to know what gear you should be in based on the way everything has been tuned. Without a doubt, personality is the big reason to buy the Z. You might argue that the Supra also has a personality, but that personality speaks with a German accent at the very least. And the engine under the hood, even though it is an inline-6 as you'd expect in a Supra, is a BMW inline-6. This twin-turbo V6 is all Nissan. We also find it, of course, in the Infiniti product line. There are pros and cons to that. It's not quite as smooth as the inline-6, but it has a distinctive personality to its sound. Also, the power delivery is a little bit different. It's not quite as linear as the BMW inline-6. It doesn't have quite as much torque either. It won't get you as fast 0 to 60, but I like the way this does it. And then there's the fact that this is a twin-turbo V6 versus the naturally aspirated V8s that we find in the Camaro, the Mustang, or the Dodge if you want to consider it a competitor. Styling is another big reason to get the Z over the competition, so let's take a look at that now. The Z doesn't just have a distinctive driving personality, it has a distinctive aesthetic to it as well. This particular grille design has been somewhat controversial, and there are some different grilles available out there if you want to swap it out aftermarket. It appears that in the Japanese market, the Z may have some options for a different grille at some point in the future as well. But I actually think this looks pretty good. It reminds me definitely of some classic Zs of yore. We also have the sort of ovaloid theme to these LED headlights, again harkening back to the Z tradition. Interesting bit of trivia, my mom actually owned a 240Z. She bought one new and she still talks about it all these decades later. But this is certainly a more modern sports car. In addition to the distinctive LED headlights, which have an LED turn signal, sort of like an eyebrow on top, we have front parking sensors and rear parking sensors. Definitely a distinctive long hood design as well. I love the combination of flowing curves and distinctive hard creases that we find in this design. It's a little bit difficult to tell in this light, but this crease works around the bumper there, and then it comes up the middle of the hood, wise off, and then gives us sort of a power bulge in the long hood. Upon closer inspection, however, you'll notice that the longer hood profile we find in this versus the 370Z has mostly to do with a slightly longer front overhang. Like the 370Z and the 350Z before it, the new Z rides on the Nissan FM rear-wheel drive platform. That's the same platform that underpins the Infiniti Q60 Coupe and the Q50 sedan from Infiniti as well. That's not a problem because this is an excellent rear-wheel drive platform even when it has been shrunk considerably to fit the new Z. Under the hood we find the same twin-turbo engine that we find in those high-horsepower Infinitis as well, obviously with a few tweaks for the Z also. 400 horsepower, 350 pound-feet of torque from a 3-liter twin-turbo V6. You'll notice this is definitely shorter than the inline-6 that we find in the Supra. So all of this space up front really is either crash protection, cooling, or simply styling with that very pointy front end. You can get this with either a 6-speed manual or a 9-speed automatic transmission. And any way you slice it, all the power is going to the back. If you get the optional performance package, as I mentioned earlier, you do get a limited slip rear differential in the back. That's certainly something that I would want from the factory. Now, I don't find the overhang to be a problem at all. In fact, it is a little bit longer on the Toyota Supra because it has a shorter wheelbase for almost exactly the same length, just about 172.5 inches long. When it comes to the styling, I think Nissan hit the nail right on the head. This is the perfect blend of modern meets nostalgia. The Supra, on the other hand, its closest competitor in the United States, does kind of look from some angles like a kid wearing his dad's clothes. And that's because, of course, Toyota was trying to put basically Toyota clothes on a BMW. And even though this is obviously related to the 370Z, the 350Z, etc., that's just Z wearing Z clothes. And I guess you could say this is Z in a new suit. Moving around to the back of the car, we have some more nostalgia going on, tail lamps that remind me a lot of the 300ZX from the 1990s, but again with a more modern flair. These are multi-level LED modules with amber turn signals and a really cool look back here. Also dual exhausts, just as you'd expect. The one thing that is a little bit interesting is the trunk release. The button is actually in the bottom part of the Nissan logo, and then you lift right up here, so you're not actually pulling on the Nissan logo. To be honest, I wish this black portion of the rear was part of the trunk lid because the lift-over height for cargo is pretty high. Not that Nissan intends people to go on too many Home Depot runs with their Z, but you do have to lean over pretty far to put cargo in the back as well, because this entire section is part of the structure of the vehicle, not part of the cargo area lid. And the distance between the opening of the cargo area and the bumper itself is a little bit more than a foot, so you do really have to lean over with those bags, and of course you're getting your pants on the rear bumper as well. Also, this cargo area is kind of a flat cargo area. It's really not very tall, so this is about the tallest bag you could put back here. And if I wanted to put that in a more upright position, I'm gonna have to do this gently so I don't hit the glass. You can actually see you can't really close the trunk lid. You can squeak some of those taller bags right back there in the cargo area, but we also have a cargo area that's impacted by the suspension mount points for the rear suspension. Some of you might be wondering, is the cargo area so shallow so that way they could give us a spare tire? No, it's so they could give us somewhere to put the subwoofer. You can see that there's a lot of foam divider all the way around the subwoofer. It's a Bose design right there. And then we have the Canna Fix-A-Flat and tire inflator on each side. Maybe they could have given us an inflatable spare tire or something like that. I really wish instead they had just given us a bit more cargo room. For my 6-foot tall frame, I found the front seats to be a little bit less comfortable than the BMW seats that we find in the Supra. These seats are an interesting combination of manual and power adjustment. I have two knobs over here on the outboard side of the driver's seat. The back one adjusts the height of the seat bottom cushion in the rear, and the front of the seat bottom cushion. Kind of an interesting twist there. The key thing to know here is that the seat back cushion does not go up and down with the seat bottom cushion. So that means that adjusting the seat bottom cushion also adjusts exactly where on my back the adjustable lumbar support, that's adjusted via a lever on the other side of the seat, adjusts where that actually hits me in my back. And I find the ideal lumbar support position to not really be compatible with my height and the height of the ceiling in here. Now, if this seat is all the way down and I'm sitting in a comfortable upright position, I have about an inch of headroom left. So taller drivers might have a problem in the Z, especially if you want to do any tracking or autocrossing where you would need to wear a helmet. I did try a helmet in here. I actually had to slouch because even at 6 feet tall, I will not fit in here properly with a helmet inside. I'm not sure how many Smurfs had to give their lives in order to upholster this interior, but whatever the carnage, I think it was worth it, because I really love bold interior color options, and this very, very blue on black interior is certainly a bold look. We have height adjustable headrests for the driver and front passenger. You can see the interesting armature there for the shoulder belt, because if you're far forward, that door is pretty large. That seat is essentially all the way back in its tracks and reclined just about as far as it will go. As you can see, we don't have a moonroof up here, so the headroom area bulges out a little bit for taller folks, but not if you have longer legs. So if you're taller and you want that seat further back, then you actually have a little bit less headroom going on there. Up here on the ceiling, we have some pretty typical Nissan parts, so very similar light module there to what we find in other Nissans. The SOS button over there, sun visors with a side extension. That's kind of a nice touch, but the rest of the sun visor does not pull out. If I go back to the rear, you can again see that cargo area back there. We have that support beam that runs from one side to the other. You can see the intrusion of that suspension. And then if I tilt the passenger seat forward, you'll notice that we do have a little bit of extra cargo capacity behind the seats in these small storage wells. There's also a little cubby where you can keep your instruction manual and your registration, and then there's some carpet padding down there to help quiet things as they roll around. There's also one a little bit difficult to turn that around, but there's also one right there behind the driver's seat. This is a good time to talk about the partial power seats I mentioned earlier. You can see those controls over there on the side of the seat. We have seat recline with that button right there, and then the one in front of it is seat forward and backward. So manual seat bottom cushion adjustment, but then power seat forward, backward, and recline. These seats not ventilated, they are just heated, even though they're perforated in the middle. And this is a combination leather and imitation suede seat. That imitation suede also happens over there on the doors. Again, a really attractive look. There's also just a little bit of that imitation leather upholstery running right across the dash. So the seats use real leather, it appears, but the dashboard components, like most vehicles with stitched components, those appear to be an imitation material. Decent amount of soft touch materials in the upper section of the dashboard. This is kind of a rubbery, soft plastic. We then have an interesting touch over here where the air vents are actually on the doors, right there, right next to the door handle rather than on the dashboard. Speaking of the dashboard, we have 3 pods in the middle of the dashboard with extra gauge modules there. You can see we have a turbo speed gauge. That's pretty unique as far as new cars go. Also turbo pressure and voltage. I actually kind of wish the voltage gauge was maybe incoming air temperature, since that's really not very useful for modern cars at all. We have 2 large air vents up there. Decently sized touchscreen, basically borrowed out of the rest of the Nissan lineup, running basically the same software that we find in some of those other vehicles. Supports Apple CarPlay and Android Auto integration, but rather than having a Nissan icon to get back to the menu, we just press that menu button and we get back to the native Nissan interface. Big power knob over there, trip reset and dimmer control tucked up there. Controls for the single zone automatic climate control right down there with 2 USB inputs. No Qi wireless charging mat or anything like that, but we do have a place to store your smartphone. The cable can kind of get in the way, especially if you have the 6-speed manual transmission. Speaking of manual transmissions, reverse is where it should be. It's over there to the right and down, but it is a gated shifter, so you have to push it down to actually get it over there into reverse. You don't just push it all the way over. Over here we have the engine start, stop button. Down here we have the controls for the heated seats, also a rear hatch opening button, and then we have some somewhat unusual cup holders here. So one that's accessible all the time, and then we have the armrest that slides forward and backward, covering up that other cup holder. I really think that Nissan could have done a better job with the cup holders in this vehicle, put the heated seat button somewhere else, etc., because that does make this cup holder somewhat inconvenient. It's also a little bit differently shaped than the one up front, so identical drinks won't necessarily fit well on either side. We have a pretty traditional handbrake right here, right next to, again, those power seat controls. That's perhaps a better look at those controls right there. On the driver's side, we have an attractive full LCD instrument cluster. It offers essentially 3 different themes. If I go over here to change meter view, this is the sport view. We can also get a normal view. This is somewhat similar to other Nissan products, as is the other view. So if I click that change view again and move over to enhanced, the dials coil over here to the other side, sort of like a Nissan Rogue. I'm definitely more a fan of the sport layout where we have those additional gauges over there on the right side. Another odd twist, we have another boost gauge over here. So in addition to the physical one on the dash, you can get a digital one in here. The steering wheel is a round 3-spoke design with sport grips up top. You'll find controls for that multifunction LCD cluster over here, along with track forward, backward, and volume up, down. Z logo, of course, there in the middle. The bottom spoke is split, giving it a distinctive look, but we don't have a flat bottom wheel, which is a bit surprising since Nissan loves flat bottom wheels in other vehicles. Over here on this side, we have the controls for the cruise control system, along with the voice command button and phone button. Some folks have given Nissan a bit of a hard time for the parts recycling in here. Yes, these are the same door handles as the outgoing 370Z, and these are the same window switches, etc., that we find in the rest of the Nissan lineup. But I actually think that's okay, because this is a Nissan, and at least it doesn't use BMW parts on the inside or some other car manufacturer's parts. This is all in-house designed, and the design as a result is certainly much more cohesive than what we find in the Supra. Now, don't get me wrong, I like the Supra. In fact, I like the Supra's performance a bit more than the Z. I like the way that it goes 0 to 60. I like the ZF 8-speed automatic transmission more than the 9-speed that we find in this. But this has so much more personality, it's more unique, and it's also what it says on the label. Because the Toyota, yes, it feels a bit different than the BMW Z4, but it doesn't feel as much different as the Z does, and I think there's definite value to that. Also, the Supra is going to be a lot more expensive. This starts at $40,990, and you get the same 3-liter twin-turbo V6 producing 400 horsepower under the hood, your choice of the automatic or manual transmission. To get into a Supra is going to cost you about $4,000 more than that, and that would just get you the 2-liter 4-cylinder Supra. If you want the 3-liter turbocharged Supra, that's about $12,000 more than the 370Z. Yes, the Supra is going to be more car in some ways than the Z, but I think this looks better, it looks more distinctive, and you could spend the $12,000 on a ton of performance upgrades that would make this absolutely blow a stock Supra 3.0 out of the water. Interesting twist, this is more expensive though than some of the alternatives with a back seat. Now, the Mustang doesn't have the best back seat, neither does the Camaro, but it does have one. And if you're in a situation where you need the extra room, whether that's for cargo or for small people, the Mustang GT is going to be less expensive than this and a bit more practical, but not as much fun. However, certain versions of the Z may actually be less expensive because the top-end proto-spec trim of the Z is $54,000. That is logically a decent amount more than the base model, but the pricing window of this is considerably narrower than a lot of the competition. And that's why this is one of the best performance cars in North America. You can get a very solid performer with the manual or the automatic for about $42,000 after destination, plus of course tax title license in your area. That is still under the price of the average new car in North America. And for that price, you get 400 horsepower. There's not a lot out there that will give you as much or more horsepower for the same price. For me at least, the combination of performance, personality, and yes, I will say it, value in the Nissan Z are what put this at the top of the pack for me. If I didn't need the back seats, I would buy this over the Mustang, I would buy it over the Camaro, the Supra, the BMW Z4, and yes, I would buy it over some of the inexpensive Porsches out there because for the price of any of those other German options, you could buy a Z and about $20,000 of performance upgrades, or what I would probably do is buy a Z and then go on a $20,000 vacation, or go on a $1,000 vacation and pocket the other 19 grand if I suddenly sprouted an extra $20,000 that I absolutely do not have. Otherwise, I might end up buying something like the Z because this is an awful lot of fun to drive. Again, it is flawed in some ways, but the flaws of the Z are what make it have a personality that we don't find in some of the competition. The manual transmission's particular feel is very distinctive. It's not sanitized, it's not too plasticky, etc. It sometimes can feel a little bit less refined than some, but all that really just goes down to the personality. And then again, there's the style, which I really love. I definitely was around in the early 90s, so I definitely remember the Zs with this particular light pattern in the back. I was not alive, of course, for the historic front end that this is trying to emulate, but I really like the look. Let me know what you think about all that. Would you get one? Would you get something else? Let me know down there in the comment section below. And do you wish that Nissan eked a bit more power out of this 3-liter engine? That is one valid complaint. 400 horsepower is fantastic. 350 pound-feet of torque, a little bit less fantastic, and the power delivery curve of the engine, I think, could be a little bit better. I would love it if the automatic transmission version of this was solidly under 4 seconds, 0 to 60, because in the BMW family, you do find better performance out of their 3-liter inline 6. So a Z that went 3.7, 3.8 seconds, 0 to 60, for maybe even 5 grand more, that would be absolutely fantastic. See all of you later.